what are some of the keys to fostering the growth of leaders within your organization?
First of all, I think that, Tom, I think 90% of leaders never develop leaders. I think they just have followers. And one of the reasons is a lot of leaders don't really want other leaders. Leaders are hard to lead. I mean, it's like herding cats, you know, I mean, they just don't naturally fall in line. So I think that, first of all, most people don't really develop leaders. But in developing leaders, you know, there are three things that are just absolutely essential. You know, in the book, The Leader's Greatest Return, I wrote The Leader's Greatest Return because I truly believe that the greatest return a leader ever gets is developing other leaders, because that's when you really begin to compound. And I think there are three essentials always in developing leaders. First of all is your own example. People do what people see. So if I'm going to develop leaders, I have to be a good leader. Maybe the greatest leadership words ever said was follow me. Just follow me. Watch me. Because people, what Stanford research says, that 89% of what we know visually. And so I think, first of all, in developing leaders, you have to model it. The second thing I think in developing leaders is you have to be intentional. I think that you have to commit yourself to finding them, which I talk about in the book, letting them come to the leadership table, discerning what kind of capacity they have. And then I think you have to intentionally have a program of development for them. I think you have to have a process. I think of all the money we spend in companies in marketing and in advertising. And you know, I was speaking one time, this was several years ago, for AT&T. And when I was introduced to their maybe top 300 leaders, I was going to spend an afternoon with them. The guy said something very interesting. He said to them, he said, "You're our most appreciable asset." And of course, that's a wonderful statement there. Everybody loves that. And I came up behind him and I said, "It's true and it's not true." I said, "You're really only an appreciable asset if somebody intentionally develops you and you intentionally develop yourself. We don't automatically get better." And this is a big miss. I think that we think, well, if I just automatically go to work or if I automatically do my job, that I'll just grow. And you know, I had a mentor when I was in my 20s just say, you know, "John, growth is not automatic. You know, getting older is automatic, but getting better isn't." And there's a world of difference. So I think that you have to be an example, and I think you have to be incredibly intentional in saying, okay, I'm going to have a leadership culture. I'm going to develop leaders. And the third thing I think that is just overlooked consistently in developing leaders is that you've got to empower them. You have got to let them run the ball. Because the only way you learn leadership is by practicing leadership. So I think what a good leader does is she sets the stage for a successful run. You want to get some wins under their belts for them. And I just think that it's an empowering environment where you release people. And the problem is leaders will stop and say, well, but they don't do it as well as I do it. And so that's not the point. The only way they can ever do it as well as that you do it is for them to do it. And then for you to coach them and come alongside of them and say, okay, here's how you can do that better. And you know, we have a kind of like a 5-step equipping process. I do it, you're with me, you do it, I'm with you, you do it, and then you do it and someone else is with you, and it's a multiplication process there. So I think those three things of the example, the intentionality, and the empowerment, that's I think what develops a leadership culture that really establishes the fact that if you want to learn how to lead, this is a place where you can do that. I say this in the book, by the way, that when I would bring people on the team, I would share with them that I wanted them to work themselves out of a job.
Yeah.
And pretty much I would just say, okay, you've got the job. I want you to do it well. Let me see you do it well. But while you're doing it well, you find somebody to replace you. And that's how that's really how you develop. You talk about a farm team of leaders. And if you can work yourself out of your job, I'll give you another job. You know, Mark Cole, who he and I are owners of the company now, and he's the CEO and president, but he started off in the stockroom 20 years ago.
Whoa.
20 years ago. And I was just asking him recently in a conversation, I said, how many jobs did you work your way out of to get where you are? He said 9.
Wow.
9 times. And I tell people, first of all, I can't promote you unless you got somebody to replace you. So the first part of promotion isn't just getting better till I want to bring you up. First part of promotion is to show me some person that we're not going to have a big loss if I do bring you up. And 9 times he worked himself out of a job, found somebody else and said, okay, come on up, until one day he's where he is.
I'll give you one quick personal illustration, because this one's really still kind of cuts deep. When I was 17, my dad, when I told him I was going to be a speaker, he said that I want you to start filing every day, read and file every day. Because he said you have to have content. Content's key. So keep reading and filing so that you always have something to say. So at the age of 17, I started the practice of reading and filing every day. Literally have done that all of my life up to 69. So, that's a lot of years, 50 plus years of reading and filing. That's why thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of articles and quotes and illustrations. Okay, because I've done it every day. Last summer, I just began to look at my files. I mean, I have 1,200 plus subjects in my files. When my kids went to college, you name a subject, I got stuff on it. I mean, I was the librarian. And I've thousands, not hundreds, thousands of times while writing, I've gone over, pulled out my folder, pulled out an article, got that little man that works right here, and I just built off of that thing, put that back in, checked it, said I did it on this lesson. Whoop, boy, that was so good. I've done this thousands of times. And just this last summer, I began to look at those filing cabinets and all of those folders, 1,200 plus. And I began to say to myself, if I'm going to grow into tomorrow, I need to let go of those. Now, I wouldn't tell anybody because that's everything to me. This is I used to say, if there's ever a fire, let everything burn, just get my files out. And I can live for another day. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to play with the idea of letting them go, so that I literally cannot depend upon anything of yesterday, but have to constantly learn and create and stay sharp today. And I remember going through that process. I for about 2 months, I would just go by my filing cabinet and look at it. And I'd say, am I willing to give this up? Didn't tell Margaret, didn't tell anybody. Because I knew emotionally how hard this was going to be for me. I came to the conclusion that I was outgrowing my resources. Because if you filed yesterday, and you filed 10 years ago, and you filed 20 years ago, if what you filed 20 years ago excites you when you pull it out today, you're in trouble. And I was outgrowing my resources, and I needed to let go of yesterday if I really wanted to make tomorrow count. So I finally said, okay, this is going to be the day. Again, I told no one. Went to the room where my filing cabinets were. Margaret was gone. And I spent about 4 hours going through every folder, crying. I pull out this folder. So I remember when I put that article in there. Oh my gosh, I remember exactly what I thought when I did that. And I just looked at every one of them for 4 hours. And I also, there were some of them I thought, oh, this is too good to throw away, and I'd pull it out. And I'd kind of go on, and then I'd look over there, and I'd see that on top of that filing cabinet, and I'd say, oh no, put it back in, John. If you're going to let it go, let it all go. So 4 hours, I just went down memory lane, and I hugged those folders. There are a few of them that I kissed. A lot of them had tears on them, and I put them all away. We lived in the condo at that time and at the Ritz, and so I called one of the bellmen down and gave him $200. I said, I'm going to leave for a couple of hours. When I come back, I don't want to see any of these filing cabinets. He said, what do I do with them? I said, I don't care what you do with them. I don't want them anymore. 2 hours later, I came back, and they were all gone. Then I sat on the floor and cried again. Like, oh, you stupid man. But guess what? Today, I'm growing because I'm not relying on yesterday to get me through today.
I want to talk about what Gene Veneer said. He's a Catholic philosopher, and he said growth begins when we begin to accept our own weakness. Mm-hmm. And the whole time I'm listening to John, it's the beginning of a new year. You and I, we've grown a lot together.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to be launching 2022 with you, ready to grow and learn some things together.
Well, I think it's interesting because you said we've grown a lot together. I don't think we've had a choice, right? Like when you work in this environment, oftentimes we talk about being in a leadership bubble around here, and we take it for granted because with John and his mentoring of us and encouraging of us, again, we didn't have a choice to be able to do that. And so I'm super excited to kind of talk about this with you and talk about the difference because so many people as leaders and organizations individually, they have goals, but they don't necessarily think about it from a growth standpoint, right? That goal mindset versus growth mindset. Yeah. So let's kick it off this way, because when I think about lofty goals, you've given me lofty goals as one of your leaders. I've seen John give you even loftier goals to accomplish what's filtered down. And oftentimes when leaders are given lofty goals or put lofty goals out there, they get frustrated over this big lofty goal. And instead of looking at it as a growth process to get to that goal, they just look at it as a goal, which is frustrating, versus begin thinking about how do I grow to that lofty goal. So again, I want to go back to you personally first. Let's start with you personally. You work for a guy that challenges you every single minute. I was going to say every day, but it's every minute with lofty goals, lofty ideas, opportunities to add value to people. How do you personally receive those and stay on a growth process for yourself to be able to go after those?
Well, so I love the question, and I love it in the context of this lesson because John obviously wants us in this lesson, and you and I have worked with him for 2 decades. John wants us to be growth conscious. I mean, he has a preference here. Yes. It's goal conscious, growth conscious. His preference, let's just state it if it's not clear to anybody watching or anybody listening, he wants you to be growth conscious. Yet we do talk about numbers. One of my favorite lines is when I'm introducing John, I said he sold 34 million copies of his books. How do we know? Because he's counting.
That's right.
Because he knows his numbers, and we've laughed about that. Some of my most embarrassing moments is to give John an update, and I give him the wrong update, and he goes, no, I think the real update is this.
He knows.
I'm going, how do you know? He knows his numbers. So do we run our business with numbers? Absolutely. Do we focus on objectives? I like to call them mile markers rather than goals. But do we focus on objectives that give indication of progress and growth and goals met? Yes. But I've got to tell you, pursuing audacious goals in John Maxwell's environment, for me personally, is a lot easier than pursuing goals perhaps for many of you watching today or listening, because a lot of organizations, they focus so much on goals that goals become more important than growth. And I've got to tell you, I've missed some goals. We can talk about some of my biggest mistakes and missing the book launch of Intentional Living.
I knew that was the first one you were
We can talk
up.
about all that. And I'm lost, speaking of numbers, I lost $1.6 million with some bad decisions. We can talk about all that. But here's what I rest on, and what I want you as a leader in this organization to rest on, and what I want to challenge everybody watching, listening today. It is a lot easier to chase goals when you know growth is a greater objective than a goal.
That's true.
It's absolutely easier. So I have stretched to hit some big goals and actually hit some. I've stretched to hit some goals and, be honest, missed it. But very rarely do we spend time on missed goals as long as there is an obvious growth objective that's been hit.
Yeah. And I often hear you say, hey, no problem. Tell me what you learned, right? Like it's okay if we miss the goal. Now, listen, we're not in the business of missing goals, right? But when you do, that question that leaders you should have for yourself, you should have for your team, to show that you're a growth-minded leader or organization is tell me what you learned. And John talks about this with evaluating your experiences. He doesn't say the experiences are positive or negative. He says evaluate all the experiences. And what I loved about what you just shared is that keeps you from being frustrated. We talk a lot about how do we perpetually learn? How do we become a product of the product? How do we consume and grow and learn in a way that we're not stuck?
Yeah.
And one thing that I've learned personally is if I'm not growing, I'm not being able to lead effectively and give proper mentoring or coaching, right? Can't give what you don't have. We talk about this. Now, listen, sometimes if I'm just going to be transparent, it's starting a new year. Let's just put it out there. I mean, I get tired of it sometimes, right? Like,
sure.
I don't want to listen to another. I'm not going to say podcast because you need to stay.
Not say podcast.
Not going to say podcast because you need to stay on this podcast. And I'm so excited you're starting off the new year with us to do that. But what I find is sometimes I just want to check out. And I do check out, right?
Yeah.
But then when I do check out, and maybe you come to me and you need an idea or a thought or my team needs something, I go, I got nothing for you. Versus if I'm continually growing, I'm like, hey, this is what I heard the other day. This is what I learned this morning when I was listening to that book, whatever it was. And so I think that allows us to not get stuck as leaders.
It does. And so you did such a great job of nailing all of that down for me. One thing I just want to underscore that you just said, you are more likely to learn on a missed growth opportunity than you are a missed goal opportunity.
Yeah.
Because when we hit a goal, we're so fixated on something tangible that when that tangible doesn't happen, it shuts our emotional psyche down that we're not open to the lesson. But if we go in saying, I'm going to grow, there is a mindset that happens to make us open for the lesson even if we missed the objective.
That's right.
You go in goal conscious, and John didn't even really mention that in this particular lesson, but I've heard him mention it before. You go into something goal conscious, it's likely that you miss the goal, you won't get a lesson. You go into something growth conscious, it's likely that you're going to get a lesson even if you miss the objective.
Yeah. And building off what you just said, a thought came to mind. Wouldn't it also be true that by the time we get to that goal, at times it may even be outdated or obsolete, right? And if we're just focused on that, we're missing the whole point.
Yep.
Now, you and I, we're very passionate about this. It's the world of which we've grown up in. But let's transition now from personally, and let's talk about, John, in the growth process, talks about team growth, and he talks about others' growth that he gave us in the outline that we have right here. Talk a little bit about, as a leader, when it comes to leading our team and our organization, the things that you really focus on from a growth standpoint, making sure that we are growing as an organization and we're not staying stagnant.
Yeah. Back in December, we were diligently setting our budgets and our business plan objectives in place for here 2022, and here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we're focusing this. And so I'm thinking back right now to a conversation I had with one of our P&L owners, and we're talking through his vehicle of how he is planning for this year, for 2022. There was no comparative analysis on his budget at this particular phase in the budgeting. And I asked him, I said, hey, how did we do in this in this line last year? Well, I'm not sure, but I can get that answer for you, Mark. Well, we're growing, we're projecting 28% revenue in this particular solutions group. How much of your cost are you going to absorb? Is that good revenue or is it bad revenue?
Right.
What did we do last year according to revenue? Well, I'm not sure. Let me check. Here, I illustrate that without names very purposely. It's not you though, Chris Godey.
Yeah.
You can feel good about this. I illustrate this for this reason right here to answer this question. I believe the greatest way to measure your business, now this is going to freak some of you out, is based on growth, not on goals. Because I want to say this because it's really important. I believe hitting a small goal is worse than missing a big goal. Now, we may unpack that if we have time, because I have worked alongside people that did not agree with me. Said it was an integrity issue.
Well, and I've been frustrated with you in the past, if we're just being candid, when you come in and challenge us, and yeah, it's absolutely.
And we'll come back to that, because I want to stay on this point of how do we manage our business in the John Maxwell Enterprise. And from day one, of me running this organization 11 years ago, it's been on comparative analysis. Comparative analysis, here's what I mean. When I get a business plan from you, Chris, or somebody else on our team, I want to know how this compares to what we did last year in this particular business objective. Even when we're spending money, when we're hiring more people, I want to know what our cost of goods sold was last year compared to what we think they're going to be this year. Right. Why? Because it creates one of our values. This is why we're so passionate about this. This is why I have the book right here for you. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's because I believe with the value of growth, we should always be focused on growth. And John teaches goals will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not minimizing those of us that have to work to set goals and be goal-minded. But we have learned, and we grew, me and you, our leadership team grew our company from the day I took over as CEO till last year, we grew 783%. That's a big number. That's a big goal. We did that by focusing on growth. We focus on growth by comparative analysis to the same period last year, the same concept last year, the same business line. So on any budget, I look at the budget and I want to know, is there a number compared to budget? Is there a number compared to performance last year? And is there a percentage of growth from last year to this year or a decrease of spending this year compared to last year? It's all on comparative analysis.
I felt like I should have been taking notes right there to make sure that in all of our meetings moving forward, I didn't. But what I love about what you said too there is it's so true because I think back to the last 18 months, no matter what your KPIs are, we're talking revenue numbers, different COGS, all this. Whatever your KPIs are, you should have these goals, whether they're lofty goals, whether they're small goals. And what I was thinking about when you're talking about that, and I want you to unpack this a little bit for us, is I was thinking about the last 18 months when we all had to throw our business plans out the window.
That's right.
And what you came to us and said is, hey, we value growth, and growth is something that we're going to focus on. I'm going to throw out the comparatives, and I want to see a small growth in something in your business month over month. That's what I want to hear about. And I thought that was so important because it re-engaged our team and go, we'll never get there to that goal point, right? And we got frustrated. You brought us out of that frustration and said, no. Every single month I want growth of some kind. It may not be what we're used to. It may be a different KPI, but I want you talking about growth. Talk a little bit about the importance of that. When you got to be flexible, but then also dialing it back down and making sure that we're really focused on the small things, which will then take care of the larger things in our budgets, our KPIs, whatever they might be.
Yeah, so Chris, you and I have been a part of John's organization for longer than what you and I really want to admit. Certainly before my 15-year-old daughter was born, before your daughter was born. Was Rylan born when you first started?
He was not.
He was not. So before kids.
Yes, before kids.
You and I started, and there's something, again, that I promise you is consistent to us. If you're listening, I'm holding up the 15 Laws of Growth book. We value growth. Now, when I say we value growth, do we value growth or do we not? And so what happens back in March, April, and May of 2020, back in COVID, we kept coming and reporting off of our numbers, Chris, and it was like a funeral every time we came because we were trying to report off of something that was dead. Our business plans were dead, and we kept coming to try to do it. And I went home that second meeting, and I went, I can't do this again. I can't do it. I will lead through difficult times. I'll lead through it, but I can't be a part of an organization that is post-mortem in everything that we're talking about. I can't do it. So like you said, we threw that out and we began to highlight growth points. I'm going to pause right here. And to those of you viewing, I'm going to challenge you to go pick up this book, 15 Laws of Growth. For those of you that's listening, I'm going to challenge you to go to the podcast notes. And we're going to put a link in there to go order the 15 Laws of Growth. In fact, we've got a discount, 15% off to celebrate January as Growth Month.
Great book to start the year off with.
It is. And it's a great book to start off with if you've never read a Maxwell book. It's a great book to go back and remind yourself since it's January, because some of you have goals of losing weight. Can anybody relate to that with New Year's resolutions or the other thing? I celebrate every last bit of that. In fact, could stand to lose a few pounds myself. But what are you doing to grow your leadership effectiveness, your leadership influence? That question and a plan around answering that question can be found in this book, 15 Laws of Growth. Chris, when you and I, over the last 20 years, one thing we know is this environment expects growth. I love doing these podcasts with you. We get great feedback all the time. But I'm going to tell you one of the things I love about the last 5-6 years is thinking about the growth that we've been able to see in each other.
Yeah.
Chris, for those of you that don't know, John started putting me on a stage to communicate when I was terrible. As Charles Barkley says, terrible.
I was getting ready to say,
I
where'd
was
that come
terrible.
from?
I was terrible. And Chris, every once in a while, I'll communicate to the team or I'll do something else, and you'll come by and say, "Man, that was a really good communication." What you're really saying is you were really bad before. No, that's not really what you're saying.
I've seen growth in you,
You're
Mark. I've
seeing
seen growth in you.
You really are highlighting growth. I do the
Yeah.
same thing with you.
Yeah.
Man, you think about the load you're carrying for our organization right now. You're much more than corporate solutions group leader. You're carrying some of these integrated, merging, acquisition things that we're doing. Why? Because of growth. Yeah. We didn't set out a goal that said Chris is going to own this many merging and acquisition things that we're doing. We set out saying, Chris, can you grow? Can you find your leadership voice? Can you step up? Are you available? Let's go. And I'm watching that happen.
First of all, it blows my mind to read that quote from Paul McCartney when he read that quote saying that they wrote a song every day, no matter what happened. I am sure there are some songwriters out there or some, people who write for a living. I'm sure that is very impressive and crazy, but is there that's why he's Paul McCartney. That's why they were the Beatles, because every day they did the work, they put in the work. So I was just curious when he said that. I wonder, what does Mark do every day? Like, in order to benefit where is your sweet spot and your part of leadership that you really put in your time and effort and energy and heart and soul, what do you do every day?
So there's two things. John teaches the rule of 5, and we could get into that whole subject. Maybe we will in another time. But there's two things that come to mind every single day that I attempt to do. One is I attempt to grow myself every day. At the end of every evening, Tracy, every evening I ask myself, where did I grow today? Mm-hmm. Now, if growth is a requirement, growth is an expectation, and you look for ways to grow, most days I can identify something that challenged me to growth, to improvement. So what have I done? I've won at what I was trying to do. So every day I experience a win because every day I attempt to grow in some area. The second thing I try to do every single day is I try to add value to someone. Now, for me, let me tell you what adding value to me means. It means to motivate and inspire people to reach the next level of potential in their life. So my goal today, I'll finish up the day at some point later on, and I'll go, did I add value to people? In my mind, Tracy, will go immediately back to this podcast episode. You and I partner with John Maxwell. We partner with Jake Decker, our podcast producer, to inspire people to reach the next level of potential. And I'll smile, I'll sit back. If it's very late, I'll lay my head on the pillow and I'll go, I added value today through the podcast that Tracy and I recorded. Having said that, if you have that mindset, that's how you make winning a habit. Now, I've had days to where I make bad business decisions. I've lost dollars, in fact, millions of dollars. I've misled somebody or frustrated somebody. But if I put into my day, today I want to add value to people, I want to grow myself, I have found that I have made winning a habit by focusing on those two things. Hey, while John was talking, I thought about a Chris Hogan a quote that I've heard. Great leaders focus on equipping their teams. It is unfair to expect what you did not equip.
Yeah.
And it brings me to what we really want to deliver to you today, and that is equipping others is the only way to grow big and to become bigger. And Chris, that's exactly, we talk about here at Maxwell Leadership, we talk about we want to be bigger, better, brighter. Our best days are not behind us.
Yeah.
We're leaning in, we're stretching toward the next level of impact. We've got the next summit of accomplishment in our view. And I think John's telling us today, you and I, to get there, better start figuring out how to equip people.
Yeah, it's a multiplication of what you desire to do as a leader, right? And John has taught us this along the way, where we don't want to develop followers. It's back to why we do what we do, right? We want to develop leaders. So we want to add value. I love what you talked about with Bob early as we introduced this episode. What I love about that is Bob's in his mid-70s and still learning.
Love it.
And still growing so that he can develop other leaders. And so I love that. While he was talking, I was thinking about his book, The Leader's Greatest Return. I was with an organization last week, and I brought that book up because everybody's like, man, when you think about business and you think about leadership, and you're like, what is the return on investment? And what John gets to at the heart of this lesson in that book is it's about developing and equipping people. Now, before we dive in and I pull some stuff just from what you're experiencing as a leader, I want to share with our audience, those that are watching and those that are listening, some statistics that I think will just kind of wake us up to the importance of the topic today. Gallup says that out of 10 people that are promoted, okay, 1 out of those 10, they have high talent to be able to lead other people, okay? 2 out of those 10 have functioning talent. The other 8, it needs to be developed in them.
Wow.
And so when you look at that and you think about your team and your people and those that are on your team, 8 out of 10 need you or your leaders to be equipping them. The other thing it said that I think is just important is they said only 40% of people feel like they have a chance to learn and grow at work, and only 33% feel someone at work encourages their development. Now, John talks about the law of the lid. And I think in organization and in teams, our lid is this topic right here, is equipping. So I want to start off about the fact that John, number 1, says that equipping has to be the number 1 responsibility of a leader. Mm-hmm. Now, listen, you are crazy busy. You're running multiple companies. Talk to us a little bit about how do you think about that and how do you act on that, of that being your number 1 responsibility to be able to build this legacy that you're building, standing on the shoulders of John with our organization. How do you go about that? How do you manage that? How do you find time for that? What does that look like in your schedule?
Well, so I want to answer that, Chris, and I want to answer it this way, because as John was talking today, and we didn't even mention this really in our pre-comments with one another and our incredible team that helps you and I do these podcasts, but I think first a leader has to really understand what I believe is a big difference between equipping, empowering, and delegation.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's so we're going to save equipping because that's where we want to go today. But let me tell you the difference between empowering and delegation. I delegate the things I don't want to do that people should be able to do, and I want to get rid of that, and I want it out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. And so I delegate. You and I have worked for leaders in our past that they were chief delegators. Yeah. They didn't care if you had the power. They didn't care if you had the resources. They just cared that you had the responsibility. They didn't give you power. They didn't give you resources. They just gave you responsibility. And there's nothing more frustrating with a leader than to be delegated something with no power and no resources.
That's good.
Now, empowering is a little bit better because we don't just delegate. We actually give you the authority. You have the authority. I have been here with John. He's now promoted me to the CEO. And Chris, I want you to be over business developing and merging and acquisition with the organization. And I look at everybody that says, whatever Chris says, it's me saying it. He has the power to do that. And you do quite well sometimes. But then there is a time to where you have been empowered, but you don't have the resources.
Right.
I think that's where equipping is what John's trying to do. Equipping is giving you the power and the resources and the experience. In other words, we'll find out a little bit later in the lesson that a really good equipping strategy makes sure that you have experience before you have responsibility. Delegation, there is no experience. You just have responsibility. Most of the time with delegation, resources are not even thought. And so when I'm listening to this lesson, I put it in a very high level of leadership called equipping, not empowering, not delegation. Let's now answer your question because it's different every time we get a new role and responsibility.
Yeah.
This is true confessions. And by the way, every Wednesday, I feel like it's confession time for Mark Cole. The things I need to work better
It's actually an intervention that the organization has decided to implement.
Chris comes in as an ambassador for all of our leadership every Wednesday to try to get me back on track.
Yeah.
And today's really no exception because the pace that I'm running, the pace that we all are running, is causing me to shortcut equipping. And you can't shortcut equipping. Again, John's going to show us, John did show us in the lesson a little bit earlier, that there is a distinct process. That's the 5 M's. There's a distinct process that you have to go through for equipping, and you can't shortcut it. Recently, we added to our team an operational leader. I've never had for a long time, I shouldn't say never, but for a long time, we've not had a chief operating officer, a operational leader. And I was cautioned by my business advisors before we hired Matt. And they said, trust me, you're going to want to delegate, equip, empower, all those things in 6 months. But it's taken you 22 years of leading operations to get where you are, and you can't do that in 6 months. And I'm discovering, Chris, that in my own world of trying to equip, I lose the number one responsibility of equipping people at this stage in my life and replace that number one priority with holding them accountable. But I'm holding them accountable to something that I have yet to equip them, and I'm frustrating all of us. And that's where I think that every leader has to understand when they move to the next level of responsibility, and they want to get to doing the things that their new appointment is requiring of them, they still cannot shortcut or reprioritize the fact that all leaders need a number one priority of equipping others.
Yeah. It's interesting. You just talked about frustrating others. When you were going through and you're talking about, and I love this, you were talking about the difference between delegation, empowerment, and then this equipping. And what I loved about it is I was like, oh, it's an aha moment for me personally, because you were talking about these differences. And for me, I was like, if I go down this route of someone delegating something or empowering me, there's more frustration in that from my leader to me that I feel towards my leader than if there is true equipping. And then you just added on top of that where you talked about not only do I need to equip them, but then I need to make sure I stay in equipping them, not just holding them accountable to that. And I thought that was a great illustration for that.
You know, I before we move to the next point, Chris, I mean, John gives us 3 questions here in this point. You may even have some comments on this, and I want you to make them because you've been in the organization a long time. But I mean, think about if every leader that's listening to this podcast or watching it would do what John challenges to do right now. Mic drop, podcast over, go to work. And it's these 3 questions. How much time do I spend weekly equipping others? And Chris, while John was teaching, I went back in the Rolodex in my mind. That's an old word for you young people that means a big old Rolodex thing on your desk of just memories or contacts was what it was most of the time. But I went through and shuffled through my mind really quick, and I went, last week, how much time did I spend equipping? Oh, it was that silent in my mind. I don't think I spent any time last week equipping in the season that we're in. Foul, throw the penalty, 15 yards back. I'm going to look today at my calendar and say, how much time am I spending equipping? And then the other question is how many people are we equipping? I've got in my mindset now, I've got 1 or 2 people that I need to be equipping so that I can get some things off my plate, rather than who can I equip to help me reach for the future. I'm trying to equip a select few to help me with my present challenges. And as CEO, if I don't keep equipping people for our future rather than equipping people to get my current schedule in check, I'm going to lose the ability to grow bigger. That was convicting to me, dude. And then finally, this 3rd question, how many people are we equipping, goes back to that same thing. Man, I'm just equipping just a couple right now, and I am paralyzing or stymieing our growth for the future the smaller my pool of equipping is.
That's good. I appreciate the transparency. I'm going to jump in this boat with you because as I listen to John and even now just our conversation, I feel convicted as a leader inside the organization when I look at those questions. And so no doubt one of the takeaways for you, whether you're watching us today on YouTube or you're listening to us, is to really get alone and answer those questions transparently. Then maybe even ask some of your top key leaders to answer them on your behalf and see where there is a gap for that. Here's where I was thinking when you were just talking about that. I read an article some time ago where Harvard Business Review said 85% of the time of most successful leaders, they interviewed and studied 200 leaders across the board. I don't know the filter of what they decided, but 85% of their time was focused on the EQ side of leadership, the emotional intelligence and connection with their people. 85% of the time.
Wow.
You and I are sitting here saying we're convicted because we don't even know if one day we spent. Now, did we do some emotional intelligence connections? We did. But did we get specific about the equipping side? I don't know that we have. And so I would challenge each and every listener and viewer to really have a conversation with yourself about that, because that's how we do multiply the impact of what you want to do. Now,
and let me go to that. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Jake, just pause the clock because we got so much to talk about. But let me, right before you were a part of this same conversation, Jared Cagle's in the studio with us. He helps me with content. He helps us all with content. Right now, he's helping John with this new book, drum roll. You can't wait for it. It's going to be The Laws of Communication. Can't wait to open that up. And he was talking about John jumping on a plane. We both got an international trip that we're preparing for currently at the time of recording. And John taking time to make sure that he spends time equipping somebody that is going to give him back some things that he needs on this trip. I was recently on a trip with John and Jared where John was laying out with Jared, these are the things that I need. This is what will help me. And then he's following up and saying, hey, as Jared said in studio a while ago, 10 o'clock a.m., 10 o'clock a.m. I'll tell you, it wasn't news to Jared. 10 o'clock may have been news to Jared, but that the timeline was coming wasn't, because a month ago we were on a plane and I heard John preparing Jared for that. You never get to establish, back to me and you playing the conviction card, you never get too successful in life that you don't have to be intentional in equipping.
Yeah.
This weekend's expectation of Jake, have it to me by 10, began a month ago on a plane of equipping because there was intentionality around equipping. So you made a point there that, equipping is important, but intentionality around that equipping is the thing that's going to make it feel less like delegation and unrealistic expectation, because intentionality and due diligence was done in the equipping process.
That's good. And not only intentionality, but in that story you're just talking about, the why behind 10 o'clock is coming, right? Because then if you explain the why to the team members and you bring them along in that process, it doesn't feel like a project, a timeline, a delegation. They feel part of it. So I love that.
Chris, I'm so glad, as I said earlier, to be in the studio with you. I love this quote just to kind of start us out today. I really don't even know who to attribute it to, but it says, the best teachers show you where to look without telling you what to see.
That's awesome.
And isn't that true? I mean, think about, for you and I think about somebody that was a teacher or a facilitator in our life.
Yeah.
It was what they showed us as much as what they told us.
Yeah.
And I love this lesson from John. I love digging into it and getting ready to go with you.
What I love about that, first of all, thanks for having me back. I know in the intro you said it had been a little while. I hadn't received an invite from Jake in some time, and so I wanted to talk to you about that.
You're back on trial.
You're back on trial. I'm back. I don't know who didn't show up today, but I'm here to help you out. What I love about that is a statement of, teaching people is bringing the best out in them. And in that quote right there, you're driving curiosity in your people to get them to go look and to search versus telling them, and you're facilitating that growth in them in order to bring the best out.
So quick story on that. Again, it's Miss Richardson, for my third grade teacher. And she really served as a facilitator, but I remember her, and I don't remember what she taught me. I think I learned my multiplication tables back then, maybe. I think it may have been third, fourth, or fifth. But she taught me, I'm sure, how to read. But she taught me how to feel. She always told me, she says, you remind me of my son. You remind me of somebody very dear to me. And what Ms. Richardson was really showing me was the best way to be a student in her class was to feel like a family member. And I learned so much that particular year. And again, think about the people in our life that has taught us or facilitated a lesson or a thought in our life. It all comes back to that point. They show us, they let us dig into it and find it more than they teach us.
And as leaders, one of the things we're looking for is not only to drive our curiosity and engagement, but to drive the engagement of those that are under our leadership, under our influence, whatever that might look like in your world. And so that's such a big driving factor when you talk to leaders is, how do I get my team more engaged? And what I love about where John is going with this is that we can be great leaders, but we need to be really, really, really good, great teachers in order to drive that engagement level. And so what I want to do is I want to just pick your brain for a minute. And I want you to share also a little bit about what you do in regards to the team. So as I was listening to John's message and we were preparing ahead of time, the first thing that came to mind under point number one, where John talks about it's not about you, it's about them, is you meet with our leadership team, your direct reports. On a monthly basis. You meet with us more than that, but on a monthly basis to really just cast the vision for the organization and talk about what's going on. But before we do any business, you spend 15, 20, depending if you're on a roll, 30, 45 minutes. Which
Keep going.
But you spend time just teaching us. And it's not about what you're learning or what you need to know. It's about what you have learned over the last 30 days that you think would add value to us, that you think would learn, that would help us as we learn. And so you spend time facilitating a conversation. It's interactive at times. Sometimes you're just teaching us. Talk about why you do that. And as long as I've known you, you've been doing that. Talk about why you do it, where maybe you learned it from, and then how you go about that and how you decide what it is that you want to facilitate or teach us so that it adds value to us as your direct reports in the room.
Well, I think it comes back to a real appreciation for any nugget that I get. I teach a lesson, a discovery, an enlightenment as a gold nugget. Because I do believe that if you shine it off, if you put it in your pocket, if you put it into your being, into your leadership, and you begin to use it, that consistency of use on that nugget is the thing that compounds influence in your life.
That's good.
Believe that with all of my heart. So it comes from a fundamental foundation that every podcast, and I'm looking right now to those of you that are tuning in to YouTube, every podcast, no matter how Southern, how don't and doesn't, and my contradictions contradict one another, I'm going to tell you, in every podcast, there is a nugget for you. It's the belief, Chris, that every message on a Sunday morning or every moment with John or every chance I get with a mentor or a facilitator in my life, there is something that's going to be deposited into me that with intentionality will give me great reward, great return. So, number one, you start there. Every moment, every lesson, everything that you are given is worth something if you will begin to use it. The second thing I would say, it really comes from hearing John teach about ACT all of our life.
Yeah.
Everything should have an application, apply, A. Everything should have something that you can change or do something a little bit better, a little bit different in your life. And everything should be given to you so that you can train or teach others the T.
Yeah.
So when I have a lesson, I believe that the lesson is, number one, meant to be taught in some frame of reference. So I walk into every leadership meeting and I go, what have I learned lately that I am responsible to give to my leadership team? What have I learned lately? I've got some upcoming leadership meetings that's coming up soon. I already know the thoughts that I've just picked up recently that are intended, yes, for my betterment, but are intended so that I can share with others and see them improve too. And when you have those two fundamental philosophies in life, everything has something that is able to be mined, to be captured, to make better your life. And everything that you give is meant to be given to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I walk into every leadership meeting and I am thinking, what have I learned recently that should be transferred into this environment that I'm walking into?
And what I love about what you do with that is you process and you begin thinking about those nuggets, and then you transfer them into what is it that they need? Where is the team now? How do I take what I'm learning and make it very practical and applicable to where the team is as a whole. And it may be the entire team, or maybe certain team members, but you come in with that and you're already thinking about it for our next meeting. It could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, doesn't matter. You're already there and you're beginning to do that. And here's what that does for us as a receiver of that information. I read this statistic the other day that talked about when you teach, when you facilitate, when you develop your people, they are just organically going to be 17% more productive.
Wow.
Because you're doing that. And I think the beginning of those meetings, when you spend time doing that investment of time is showing up in a return on when we walk out of there, we are more inspired, we're more engaged. We want to enhance our productivity. We're buying in. And so I think this is, when John talks about this, I think this is just such a great point to make sure that we are teaching not just what we're learning, but what we're learning and how it applies to the leadership team.
And I want to say one more thing. I absolutely give it just to enrich your life, or to enrich the personalities, the people in each of the meetings. But on days that I am most effective with that, I'm able to attach it to the rest of the meeting agenda so that we can have corporate application to it as well.
That's good.
So it is absolutely an intent. I've been enriched. I'm better. Let me enrich and better others. But it also, on the days that I'm good, I'm better, I'm more successful, is the days that I can give team or corporate application to that too. So in a lot of ways, I'm just a facilitator of that content to make it make sense for the individual, but then to make it productive for the team as a whole in the agenda.
Which benefits them.
That's right.
Both of them benefits them. And so I am a receiver of that. And so listeners, as you're listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, I want to encourage you to think about finding nuggets that you're learning and then finding opportunities to teach or facilitate that content to those that you have the privilege of leading, of influencing. Because our favorite statement around here, everyone deserves to be led well.
Yeah.
This is the key to start with when it comes to leading the people. And, John talks a lot about at level 2 influence in the 5 levels about connecting and building relationships with people. And I think when you add value to people, when you teach them like you do to us, we immediately get connected to you. We get connected to you. We get connected to the people that are in the room. And so the power of this lesson is so strong. Just this first point, and we got 3 more to go.
Yeah.
But just this first point as a leader is something you need to be paying attention to.
Hey, don't let everybody, people listening to the podcast, don't let anybody scare you. I didn't say this in my opening notes. This is part 1, so we won't do 3 today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we'll just do 1. Some of you were looking at your clock saying, my workout's about over.
We just lost all of our listeners. We saw just a drastic drop at this mark. So, all right, the next point I want to talk about is point 2. And you have sat with John, and I've been a privilege to learn from John and from you at this, where it talks about studying your students. And talk about, as you've learned and been mentored from John as a leader, when you're getting ready to go speak, when you're getting ready to go teach, when you're getting ready to go facilitate, what goes through your mind? How do you begin to understand and study the students so that what you're delivering is very impactful to them and where they're at?
Give me, I just talked about time. Now give me a few minutes to build this out, okay, Chris? I'm going to build it out on the personal level like you just asked me, but I'm also going to build it out on my business model, and podcast listeners, I believe your business model. And so first, let me say on a personal level, I remember I was with John. John tells this story now publicly all around the world. I was with John when he was getting ready to speak to about 8,000 people. It was about 7,900 to be exact. And a young kid came up to him, flashy, a really good guy that John and I actually were going to stay after. We had changed our plane, we'd changed our flight schedule, all of that stuff to stay and listen to this incredible up-and-coming, rising communicator. And he came up to John with full of zest and energy, and he said, John, can I just get in your head for a minute? And, there was a little over-the-top kind of emotion, so I kind of perked up. And John said, sure, anything I can help you. And he said, what are you thinking about right now? Now, John was going on stage in 2 minutes, and John went, I'm thinking about the people. And he said, the people? He said, you're not thinking about your opening act, what you're going to say, how you're going to place your hands? And John said, no. He said, you're not thinking about your content? John said, no. John said, I'm thinking about the people. He said, I've already thought about my content.
Yeah.
In some cases, I've been thinking about my content for 20, 30 years. I'm thinking about the people and where are they and what is their posture and how am I going to help them? And it struck me, and now John teaches that with great efficiency and great poignancy when he goes, when you walk on stage, you shouldn't be thinking about content. You should be thinking about the people. Now, John illustrates that later on in this point, and please go back and listen if you got it. I'm not going to repeat John. But you should not be preparing your content right before you go on stage. That should have already been done.
Right.
You should be preparing your connectivity quotient. How and what is connection with this audience going to look like? Let me talk about our business plan.
Yeah.
Several years ago, in fact, it was 40 years ago, John was challenged by Les Parrott and said, John, you need to write a book. John, I don't want to write a book. I don't want to be an author. And he said, you will be able to impact people with your written word that you never was able to if you don't write a book. Well, that struck John's fancy. John was not interested in writing books. And so 40 years ago, John began writing a book so that he would be able to help people he would never meet. Well, 87 books later, 36 million pairs of hands have held a John Maxwell book. I think it was a good strategy.
Yeah.
Just like that, Chris, we began realizing that if we really wanted to make an impact in companies, in teams, we were going to have to partner with people to make them empowered and effective to where they could impact people in places we would never go as a business strategy. And so we started this initiative that really it's all about facilitating. It's empowering women and men in an environment where they like that environment, but they want to see that environment better.
Yeah.
And they want to see their influence in that environment grow.
Yeah.
They want the environment better. They want their influence in that environment to grow. Okay. Now, already some of you are going, yeah, that's me. That's me. I need my environment better. And I want my influence to grow. And so John and I began, in fact, let me distance myself. John started before me realizing that there was a strategy that we should employ on how to empower people in a team, in a company that wanted to see the company, the people in the company better and wanted to see their influence increased. So we started programs to help facilitators. That's what we call them. Yeah. That's an internal language. Don't let that scare you. We started a program that would allow people to be facilitators, that would take content. We would train them. We would equip them. They would take that content and then they would better the people in that environment. Sounds a little bit like our opening line at the podcast, right? We add value to people. Yeah. Let me say it differently. We add value to facilitators so that the facilitators will multiply value to others. And I just want to take a moment right here. This is off script, so just give me a moment, Chris. And I want to talk a little bit about this facilitation because, number one, you work with facilitators in some of the best companies in the world, the most respected companies in their industry. You work with people in those companies that are facilitators. Yeah. And I want you to, one, go off script a little bit, although it's right on script. And I want you to talk a little bit about the power of facilitation that you see in our corporate relationships on corporate teams in corporate environments.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I get the privilege to ride shotgun with some of our excellent executive facilitators, but then also organizations that have facilitators that are on their learning and development teams, and we just come alongside and help them. I think what's so powerful about what John thought about a long time ago and then you've helped implement is when you become a teacher, when you become a facilitator of content, it inspires trust within those people. And we talked a little bit about how it connects you with people, but so many organizations right now are losing people out the back door, good team members, because it's shifting a little bit about what's important to them. I was reading the other day, I think it was a Harvard Business Review article where just on U.S. businesses, and I know we have an international audience, and that number's unfortunately going to be bigger if we looked at it from international. But I was reading the other day, and it talked about how there's so much voluntarily leaving because around not alignment and purpose, but more importantly, not developing them, not teaching them, not facilitating content to them, that it's costing U.S. businesses over $650 billion dollars annually. And that just breaks your heart. It breaks my heart. It breaks John's heart because we want to be able to add value to people. And if leaders would be able to do that, even from a facilitation standpoint, it would drastically change your organization. increase the productivity. It would enhance the culture inside the organization. So we said, hey, we've got to figure this out.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we love doing is that we provide content through John's principles, and we help create facilitation techniques and teaching techniques. And back to point number 2, how do you learn about those that are going to be in your room, your students, before they get in there? How do you go about that so that when you do teach them, you're able to connect with them? And so now we have the privilege of not only working with our facilitators and facilitator in organization, but with people that have a desire that are in organizations right now or their communities that want to facilitate content to improve the culture, improve their lives, to add value to them. We provide the content. We help them with facilitation and teaching techniques. What do you do before? What do you do during? What do you do after?
Awesome.
All of that.
Awesome. And, let me put it out there in podcast land, because you think it's been a long time since Chris Scott's been here since the last time. It's going to be a long time perhaps again.
Yeah.
Because my goal, the vision that I've put out in front of our team, is I want 25,000 companies around the world to have a Maxwell facilitator in that company. Somebody that knows how to, with tools, resources, with support, knows how to make the company better, make the people in the company better, and wants to grow their influence in that organization. And so here's what I'd love to do, Chris, and we'll put this in the show notes. I'll mention it at the end of the show as well. Go to maxwellpodcast.com/facilitator. maxwellpodcast.com/facilitator, and you'll be able to get a lot more information. Some of you are ready now. Some of you want to gather the information, go back to your company and see if they will sponsor you, be a part of this, if they'll catch the vision. But we're looking for champions.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to this point that you've got to study your students. So many of us that are executives, Chris, you're an executive, I'm an executive in a growing company. We lose touch with our people, and yet facilitators seem to know where the people are and facilitate. And that's kind of how John wraps the second point up, is you got to know where your people are rather than expecting your people to come to you. One of the ways to know your people is to get facilitators down into the lifeblood of the organization, which will be closer to the pulse.
One of the things, as we kind of wrap up today, and you can hear our passion about this and adding value to people to be able to teach and facilitate others. When I think back about some of the greatest teachers that I've ever had, you mentioned your third grade teacher, they really facilitated our learning.
That's right.
And I think each one of you that are listening, maybe watching us today, you can think about, if I ask you that question, what teacher, what facilitator had the greatest impact on you? There are probably multiple people that come to mind. And our desire is to help you get there for somebody someday to look at it and go, hey, man, Mark Cole, he was that teacher. He was that facilitator. As you wrap up, I know one of the things you do about, under point number 2 about studying your students, is you spend time every week, which we sometimes challenge you on this as the CEO. We're like, Mark, every week? But you really go and listen to our facilitators, to our people, and you hear from them. You learn what are the content pieces that we need to be developing in order to serve them well in the field, and where they're at and where they're struggling. All things. Talk a little bit about the power of that in regards to you as a leader inside our organization to be able to provide more information for them.
Well, it goes with this standout statement that I want to make sure that you get from this lesson, and it's touch a heart before you ask for a hand. We've heard John say that. But facilitation, connecting with I'm no more than a facilitator every week when you in this environment to where I reach out to our speakers, our trainers, our coaches, our facilitators. I'm no more than a facilitator at that point. Now, some people call me the CEO. Some people call me the visionary. But in that environment, I'm just a facilitator. I'm just trying to understand. And here's what happens as a facilitator. I love this reciprocal impact that happens. I come with a lesson. But by the time I'm done, not only from the lesson that I've studied, prayer, it's helped me, but from the interaction, I, as the facilitator, began to grow and expand in that environment as well. John says that true leaders, he said this in the lesson today, true leaders go find the people, not expect the people to come find them. And one of my greatest experiences was 6 years ago when I decided to become a facilitator in our own environment. Now I've facilitated outside. I've worked with clients. I've done all that stuff. I grew up in the organization. Remember, I've kind of done it all. But that day that in my positional leadership, I was a positional leader at that time. I was the CEO. And 6 years ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to dedicate every Tuesday to facilitation. I'm going to be a facilitator every Tuesday. Yeah. Chris, 3 weeks into that commitment, 3 weeks in, was the most liberating thing that I've ever had as a leader. See, I thought, this is such a Lone Ranger statement, I thought I was the only one that had passion for John's legacy and our future because I'd been here for, at that point, 18 years. And I've fired up and I'm all in, and I've had these spiritual experiences that I've shared on this podcast. I knew I was called to availability and proximity to John. I get on this call and I get into the lifeblood of the organization through facilitation. And I find out the greatest discovery. There were people throughout the entire organization that had just as much passion for our vision, our legacy, and our sustainability than I had. Now, that was a hard pill for me to take at first because I wore my badge with pride.
Yeah.
And then I realized there was no badge. I was just a part of a huge community.
Yeah.
I went to where the people were, and where the people were was exactly where I wanted them to be. And I kept thinking I had to get them through inspiration and motivation and instruction. And yet, really all I needed to do is to get in proximity, which is what facilitation does. You get into proximity and you find out where your people are.
Yeah.
And for me, I've done it recently. I shared in the last few weeks about some recent family rooms that I did. That was all an intent to go to where the people are. And if there's one great takeaway from our lesson today that John's teaching us, and we'll be back next week for part 2, if I can get Chris to show up again. That's a little jury's out on that. But great leaders are great teachers. And what John's really saying is positional leaders are best when they come in and get connected at the same level with the people that they're trying to lead. And I love that. Hey, I want to again remind you, touch a heart before you ask for a hand.
Today's topic, we're going to talk about, I think this is, I love where we're going. We're going to do a little mini series here. I think there's 3 books that for what we do in organizational development and culture and working with teams that really stand out when it comes to that. One, obviously being the 5 levels of leadership. Right. That's our methodology. The second one is Leaders' Greatest Return. It's really talking about developing people and the power of that. And the third one is leaderships. These are shifts that leaders have to make often. And so today's topic is why leaders have to make the shift from goals to growth. Right. So I love where we're going on this around leadership.
Yeah, the whole idea about shifts that a leader needs to make comes up quite a bit in coaching conversations. One that I think we've done a podcast on it before was on, and it's number 1, the first shift in when you read the book about making the shift from being a soloist to being a conductor. And so that if you're used to, you're an individual contributor and you're really good at what you do, and one day they tap you and say, hey, we'd like you to lead the department or lead a team. Now you're the conductor of that orchestra. You're not just playing in that orchestra. It's a completely shift in how you think and how you act to get not just your own performance, but to get performance from others. So I thought leadership, as well as some of these shifts that we're going to cover in the next couple of episodes, will be things that I see quite a bit.
And as leaders, we have to be open to change, and we have to be changing. And that's why I love this. Like, we should always be thinking about the shifts that we're making. So today we're going to talk about where the shift from goals to growth that John's going to lead us through with this content pieces that we're just going to kind of take back and forth here. And when you start out as a leader, you know, we talk about this in the 5 levels of leadership, where we get a position and then what do? We immediately want to just start producing. We want to start hitting our KPIs, and we make a mistake to where we kind of maybe don't grow, but we also just kind of jump right over connecting with our people. And so we think that kind of hitting our numbers and the KPIs, whatever your KPIs might be, will make you a better leader. It'll increase your value. And while it does from an external standpoint, really from an internal standpoint, you got to be growing on the inside to be able to keep producing and growing outside and hitting those KPIs. And so we are big here at Maxwell Leadership about it being a growth focus versus a goal focus.
Yeah, I love that shift from growth outward, to growth inward.
It's good.
I mean, to me, that's saying if you shoot for goals, that you'll achieve the goals, but you may not grow. And it's funny, that meeting I had this morning with the client, they're talking about we get so focused on the scoreboard, on the revenue or the expenses or whatever what your measurement is, we forget to look at the daily growth that we're making as individuals to work toward that. So how do you make this leadership? And so I don't think it's 5, I think it's maybe 7.
Doggone it.
I know you're being disappointed in me. But number one, embracing change, that growth means change. And if you want to become a better leader and a better person, then you have to shift from this fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And mindset really is important in this shift. I think that I've got to be. We talked a little bit on the previous podcast about fixed versus growth. Carol Dweck and the research she does, but I can't say enough for having that mindset that I'm here to grow.
Yeah,
everything I do.
Yeah, and I remember what I just said a minute ago. Having influence and being a leader, it doesn't require change. Change is going to happen, right? So get ready for it. And we have this phrase that we say where if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance a whole lot less. And so you just need to be aware of that and know that that's going to happen. And so you got to embrace it, as Perry talked about, as we begin to think about this from a growth standpoint. And the fixed mindset leaders, they don't like it. They don't like necessarily the change. And so they think it leads to, well, it's about failure and I am failing and I need to change. All those things that kind of go with that when we hear the word change and how does it affect me? Versus if we have a growth mindset, back on this mindset thing about change, then we'll embrace the change. We'll embrace the learning and the growth that we will go through. I mean, you think about this, anything that we change or do a little bit differently, at the end of the day, we've learned something versus having that repetitive
it doesn't mean
mindset.
We like change any more than anybody else.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But I see it in a different light, is that I'm going to go, and you think about it, your whole life is about change. You wouldn't be where you are if you didn't change.
Yeah.
So, but we look at it with a different view. You say, I'm going to go through this because I'll be better on the other side.
I mean, the only reason that we now have over 3 million downloads is because you heard my very first one and you said, Chris, I think we need to embrace change.
I love you.
So I've grown through this process, and I give all that credit to you. And what we've created today, though, right? Like just continually changing. So
right. Well, the word that you made me think of is the word teachable. That
there we go. Yeah, there we go. And so our next point here, great segue.
You were
right?
so teachable.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic characteristic for a leader. And so, the question I always ask people on a coaching call, how teachable are you? And so how do you become more teachable if you decide and I think it builds trust with people when you say, when they view you as a teachable leader, that you don't have all the answers. You're always seeking to learn more. You're asking them to help you grow. You're observing, you're curious, lots of things like that. But you're looking for growth opportunities in every situation. You ask questions. You are curious. You seek out information from others. You file. John's big about filing what you've learned so that you can recall it. And then my favorite is passing on what I'm learning to others. I notice that the more I teach people, the more sticks with me to do that. So,
real quick, before you go to the next point, one of the things I was thinking about under this and having a teachable spirit and being okay with the failure side of things, which that's a strong word, but just the whole teachable spirit. We talk about the success cycle to where John talks about, hey, listen, try something, right? You're going to fail, then you're going to learn, then you're going to improve, then re-enter again. And so whether it's this podcast, whether it's leading a meeting, whether it's a new process or a system, be teachable through understanding that that's going to be a success cycle and a process that you're going to go through. Try it. Know you're going to fail. What are you going to learn? Be teachable through that. Then improve it, and then re-enter and do it again.
I'm smiling because I was in a meeting yesterday, and one of our teammates asked me, didn't you write about this on a podcast or a blog? I went, yeah, let's pull that up. And I pulled it up, and as she was looking at it, I was looking at it, I go, did I write this? It was like episode 12 or something.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. I go, oh my gosh.
At least it wasn't one when you said, hey, look, can we do this together?
All right.
Okay.
Hey, podcast listeners, do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. small improvements over time compound into big results. Download Clear by Maxwell Leadership. It's the new free app where our expert guides help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Clear app, including this podcast, and information on upcoming events such as our International Maxwell Conference this August. This upcoming conference will be like no other, so be sure to download Clear by Maxwell Leadership in your app store and register today.
Okay, number 3, make your love for learning greater than your fear of failure. I thought that was an interesting teaching to say, how big is this fear that I may have that I might not get it right? That can I make that idea that I want to grow, I'm willing to grow greater than that. Don't count losses. He says, John said, don't count losses, count lessons. I thought that was pretty good.
I love that. Don't count losses, count the lessons. Because what do? Naturally, as human beings in the flesh, we go, man, I don't have this anymore. I lost that, or I didn't do this right. Versus, man, I learned this and I learned that. So I absolutely love that, which goes into a book, that John wrote. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
Yep.
And I just think it's a powerful lesson. Well, number 4 is develop relationships with other growing people. This may be one of the strongest points that we're going to talk about today, because a rising tide raises all boats. And I know I've had the privilege of working in and around this organization for a long time, over 23, 24 years. I started when I was 5. And just being around this environment, we're in a bubble, is what we call it. It's a leadership bubble. We're challenging personal growth all the time. But I think when you're around these type of people, the easier it is for you to grow and to get, and because it becomes contagious. And so be the difference maker. Take that step and be that person for your team or your organization, and bring people around you. I was talking the other day with somebody, and we started talking about the fact that if you look at the people that you're hanging out with, what are the conversations about? Are they all about, man, you remember when we did that? Remember when it was this? Or, man, this is what I'm learning, and this is where I'm going, and this is what I'm trying. That right there, just the next conversation you're in when you go out, for a social event, you're hanging out with couples or people where, just be aware of that and listen to that and the tone of the conversation, because you want to be around those that are saying, man, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm reading, you do that all the time to me, right? Like, this is what, I was reading this book the other day, I was listening to this and I learned that, and I'm just like, holy cow. So it just encourages me to be growing.
But that's two-way. I was just thinking the same thing, is that you do that to me and our team. We're looking at what are you learning this week? What are you reading?
Yeah.
And a week doesn't go by somebody asks me, what are you reading now? Even my coaching clients are now saying, hey, what should I be reading?
Yeah.
So because we're in these conversations that we all realize we've got some growth to do.
Yeah.
Number 5, develop greater humility. Remember, we're going from goals to growth. How do I develop more humility? And this humility is really about the essence of being unafraid to admit when we're wrong or what we don't know, and being able to, it's like self-awareness and humility kind of tied in together here, about recognizing the gap that I could be filling by spending some time each day investing in me.
Yeah.
And when I admit that I'm wrong, then I'm on a path to discover what's right, and it just opens me up to learning more.
Which this is about self-awareness and being having that humility to be open to that, and that feedback from other people, maybe also some tools. We often will talk to leaders and say, hey, the longer that you have led, you've been with the team, maybe you're in that fixed mindset, right? You're in that goal mindset, probably the more unaware you are of really what's going on,
right.
The pace of your growth, the pace of your leadership, what does it look like to be on the other side of your leadership? And so I think that humility side and the self-awareness is something that you should really look at when it comes to moving from goals to growth. Number 6, believe in yourself. This is just really about, do you believe that you're worth it? You listen to a podcast, you maybe listen to an Audible book, maybe you attend a workshop, maybe you begin some coaching. Like, believe in yourself to invest in yourself and what you're learning. And when you believe in yourself and you invest in yourself, you'll begin to move from goals to growth.
Yeah, and the last one, I really would love your opinion on this before I let you wrap it up. But John used a phrase, and I thought it was interesting, about embrace layered learning.
Yeah.
And to me, you just gave a one part of that, which is, how do I do learning? Am I doing podcasts? Am I looking at books? But I'm also, for me, it's so much of what we do. I'm studying and I'm learning and I'm investing in me, and then I go out and apply it. I do experience and I try something, and I do it on a coaching call, or I do it in front of an audience. In my world, so much I do a lesson, and I get feedback, and now I'm adding to that. So I feel like I'm layering. But I wonder, how do you see layered learning when John speaks of that?
Yeah. So this is just a continuous growth mindset. Period. Piling on. This encompasses everything that we just talked about. Whereas if the previous 6, if you're doing them well and you're moving from goals to growth, what's going to end up happening is you're just going to continue to see growth principles and movement, right, laying on top of each other. And so you're going to continue to see that layered learning, which, hey, take a chance, take a risk, learn something, and then you're going to learn something more. And then but if you never take that step and begin learning, you'll never have the opportunity to experience layered learning.
Yeah. I think, Coach Bill Walsh, years ago, San Francisco 49ers, but he had a phrase that kind of upset people, because he said, the score will take care of itself. And I thought, no, you're the head coach. That's all we're about, is the score. And he said, no, if you invest in yourself, if you do the right things, if you are brilliant on the basics, if you're learning and growing and improving and growing and improving and growing and improving, score will take care of itself. I thought, isn't that true? And we get so focused on the goal, the scoreboard, that we don't do the daily things we should be doing.
Yeah.
And that the goals will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So how do we go from growth doesn't just happen to making growth happen? Now, here's the practic, and you just don't want to miss this, because I'm going to give you some stuff right now. This is pure gold, okay? This is so good, I hardly want to give it to you. And the reason I hardly want to give it to you is because it's so good, I don't want you to misuse it. So look at the person you're sitting beside and just say, take notes and don't mess up. Just tell them that. Just take notes and don't mess up, okay? I'm going to give you an intentional growth plan right now. It's just so simple. Let's go. Okay, here's my intentional growth plan. Number one, make a commitment to intentionally grow. That's where it starts. You say, well, John, that seems really simple. Make a commitment to intentionally grow. Guess what? It's really simple. But can I tell you something? When Kirk Kampmeyer looked across that breakfast table and told me that if I was going to grow, I was going to have to grow on purpose. And I looked at him and I said, I'm going to start growing on purpose. Something happened within me. Something happened within me that just changed my life. It was just a simple commitment. Nothing that I thought at that time was going to change my life, but it was just a simple commitment. I'm going to grow. I'm going to grow intentionally. And it starts there. I want every one of you. I want every one of you, for yourself, for the people that you lead, make that commitment to intentionally grow. Number two, make that commitment public. A commitment that is not public is worthless. Because let me tell you something. We all have a tendency to stray. We all have a tendency to give up. We all have a tendency to get off course. Come on. But the moment that we start making it public, I can remember I couldn't afford that kit that I showed you. And I said, can you give me 30 minutes? And I lived where we were having our breakfast was close to the house. I said, I've got to show this. I got to take this and show it to Margaret. And I said, I ran home and I got to the kitchen table and I said, we can't afford this. It's $799. And we can't afford it. And so I've got to take it right back. But I just want to show you what we're going to save our money for. And we got it all out and got those cassettes out, and we looked at the material real quickly, and I put it back in the box, and I went back there. But then I told my friends, I began telling my friends, guess what? I've made a commitment to personally grow. There's something beautiful about a shared commitment. A shared commitment becomes a strong commitment. Number three. Identify the areas that you want to grow personally in. Identify them. In other words, sit down and say, okay, where am I going to grow specifically? Now, I'm going to help you here. When you start identifying the areas that you're going to grow in, it should be at least 2 and no more than 5. 5's probably a little heavy, but it has to be at least 2. You say, well, how about just focusing on 1? Let me tell you why. You want to grow in an area of choice, and you want to grow in an area of skill. So that's 2. So when I'm talking about an area of choice, I'm talking about maybe your attitude. That's a choice, isn't it? So I want to grow in an area of choice. Maybe it's discipline. And I want to grow in an area of skill. So for me, I started off with attitude and speaking because I was speaking. I was a pastor. I want to be a better communicator. So I said, okay, speaking, that's a skill. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on my attitude. So identify what are the 2 areas at least that you're going to grow in. And then number 4, invest 1 hour a day in those 2 areas. Every day, including Sundays. Every day, 7 days, 7/24, 7. Every day. Okay, and when you spend that hour, I'm going to even tell you how to spend the hour. You spend the hour this way. Here's the way it works. Preparation, practice, reflection. Preparation, practice, reflection. Preparation, practice, reflection. Preparation, practice, reflection. You do it every day. Whether it's your choice or whether it's your skill. You prepare a little bit, practice a little bit, reflect a little bit. Every day. You're going to find this is just huge for your life. Now, while I was doing all of that preparation, practice, reflection, while I was doing all that on my speaking, I was starting to go observe communicators. And when I would listen to somebody speak, I wouldn't listen too much about what the subject was. It really didn't matter. I was asking myself one question the whole time I would listen to them speak, and the question was, are they connecting with their audience? And I would write down, if they were not connecting, why they were not, and if they were connecting, why they were. In about 2 years, I became a master in understanding how to connect with an audience. Because I studied it, and I would listen, and I would watch, and I would observe, and I would come away and say, they did 3 things that were just powerful. Okay, I got to go practice that. Okay, prepare, practice, reflect. And I would just work on that. And this is the cycle that I worked, okay? Number 5, invest 1 hour a week on reflection and writing on what you're learning. To take an hour every week and say, okay, for the last 7 days, this is what I've been practicing, this is what I've been preparing for, this is what I've been reflecting, and start that. Now let me tell you the secret on this. Because I'm kind of now talking about writing, I'm talking about maybe journaling a little bit. Let me tell you something. Don't try to journal a lot. Start with jotting. Jot before you journal. See, I jot every day. I don't journal every day, but I jot every day. 4 or 5 words. Oh my gosh, they're just mental kicks for me, okay? And then at the end of the week, you may have like 12 jots down. You with me? And you go get those jots, and you say, okay, now I'm going to spend 35 minutes. I'm going to start writing. What did that mean to me? Just jot and then journal. And then number 7, this is huge. No, I'm sorry. And then number 6, share your growth with someone. Every week, find somebody that you can share your growth with. And let me tell you how this works. You sit down with, I want to tell you what I'm learning. I want to tell you how I'm growing. Now, here's how this works. This is beautiful. When you share your growth with someone, if they're happy, do it the next week. You with me? Oh, they okay. Well, let me share. Can I share with you now? So if they're happy, keep sharing. If they're not happy, start moving. Don't ever spend time with people that aren't thrilled with your progress. The friends I dropped in my early years, were those people that weren't thrilled with my progress. Are you with me? They weren't thrilled at all with my progress. Those are the ones I left behind. I got some new friends. That's what you got to do. Because let me tell you something. If you become intentional in your growth, you'll outgrow almost everybody you know. Everything I have today is because I have good people around me. Everything.
You want to talk about any area of my success in my life, and what I'll do immediately is I'll give you the names of people. The names of people who are gifted better than I am, who complete me, who complement me, who add value to me, who make a difference for me. And they do it with such consistency. They do it with such care. They do it with such kindness. They do it with such love. And they just do it, and they do it all the time. And it's humbling to me. It's humbling to me. I mean, this is a perfect example. When I walked out to teach you today, this is the first time I was here to teach. I mean, I did nothing. I didn't set up any cameras. I didn't do anything. I didn't do any email. I didn't do anything. They just said, John, could you get ready to teach the 15 laws? So I've been over there writing and teaching the 15, working on it, upgrading, doing everything else. But everything that you're enjoying today, outside of this teaching, it's been done by others. And I can tell you right now, when I die, they can put on my tombstone, a whole bunch of people made that man. Because they have. And I'm grateful.
Well, today's topic is how leaders can grow, all capital letters, grow their people. And I see here that you have the word grow as an acronym. What's going on here, Perry? Fill us in.
Well, I know I felt a little bit at risk bringing something which some people might think is very elementary to a sophisticated podcast like this one.
That's right.
But actually, my experience tells me maybe I don't think so. I have brought this up on many a coaching call recently when a leader was struggling with how to get actively engaged in coaching. They want to be more of a coaching leader. How do I coach more with my team? And they don't know where to start. I said, have you considered this model that is called the GROW model? And I was stunned. I look at I'm watching them. We're on Zoom a lot of times, and they're taking notes and asking for clarification and questions. And I go, maybe this wouldn't be bad review it'll be a review for many, but it might be new for some.
Yeah.
And I find it to be simple enough that it's usable.
That's what I was just thinking about. I was thinking about it not being too complicated. And as I was just sharing before we went live in the studio, the fact that when I saw the content come across, I was like, oh man, I remember that from years ago, but I haven't talked about it in a while. So I'm looking forward to us diving in and kind of going through this.
Well, you do it well. I've been working with you for quite a while, and I see you with your team and how you operate with this. But I really would like your real world experience on how to apply some of this. But we do kind of complicate the coaching process sometimes. I've had people tell me that they don't coach people like they should because, I don't have a quiet office, a whiteboard, a spreadsheet, and all the stuff. You don't need all that. And I think we should describe the GROW model and how it works, and then maybe you could tell me how we can apply that.
Let's do it.
You probably should be thinking about is how do you apply when you're coaching people? Is there a problem? Is there a behavior or a performance problem, something you could be coaching to? Or you could be thinking about a career progression or helping someone understand the next steps in their progression through their career. Could be a number of maybe even process-oriented things you want to coach to in the organization. But the G stands for goal, and we need to determine right off the bat, what are we aiming for? What is this person, whether it's a performance improvement, what is the performance we're looking for? Is the career, what is the next step? But what is the overall goal is how we start that off.
Yeah, although this is simple, why I love this is Perry's bringing to us something that's very applicable when it comes to increasing your influence with people at level 2, where you're connecting with them, but also at level 4. And at level 4, we talk about this in the 5 levels of leadership of developing people. And when you do that, you increase your influence with them. And for us, I think the biggest thing that kind of pains us is that we see in organizations, the cultures around the world, there's a lid at level 3. So level 1 is kind of you lead people because of the title that you've been given. Level 2 is because you've connected with them. Level 3 is because you're producing. But then when there's just a lid there and there's this vacant area of what we call the leadership bench of developing people inside their organization. This is a great, very simple, but great tool for you to use as you connect with them and then as you think about how do I go about developing them. So now coming back to the goal, right? You mentioned this just a minute ago where if this is kind of a behavior or a performance problem, we're going after behavioral change is what we're looking for there. And what is the desired behavior in this goal? The other one was, you mentioned about it, is this a career discussion? And the goal may be, what is next? What do you want to do with your career? What's next for you in the organization, or even outside the organization, by the way? It's okay to be doing this and developing them and setting up goals, even if it is not to stay inside your organization. I think one of the things for me when I think about goal and I think about having conversations with people is that if it's within the organization and it's a behavior or performance that we're looking at and it's a behavioral change, that I want to get really clear around what the goal is. As simple and as clear as possible. Will it be uncertain? Will there be uncertainty? Absolutely. There will be uncertainty about how we're going to go about getting it. What does that look like? What are the problems? There's going to be a lot of uncertainty. But man, if we're really clear and try to get the goal as simple as possible, I think that does a great deal for not only the leader, but also the individual, what you're talking to there. And then my last thing is that I always try to talk about the goal in terms of how that plays a huge part in the enterprise, in the department, and in the enterprise. Hey, so when we go after this goal, this is how it's going to affect the department and the team. By the way, this is how it's going to affect the enterprise. And you got to help kind of tie that to goal together. And so those are two areas when you mentioned that just come to mind and thinking about the goal.
Both of those is that one, you've set up. Well, most people I don't think have a goal. They're just trying to get through the day or the week or get to the target, get to the quota, whatever. They don't really have a bigger G goal. But I like how the last piece you added is really strong about tying that goal to the overall. Why am I relevant? Why am I even here? You just increase my value to the organization because now I see why I'm here.
That's right.
To do that.
Keep it simple, but have that conversation.
Hey, podcast listeners, how would you like to be equipped with the tools to continue your personal growth and refine your strengths and weaknesses, all while being surrounded by other growth-minded leaders like yourself? You may have heard of our International Maxwell Conference, or IMC. It's our biannual event in which Maxwell Leadership Certified Team members come from all around the world to grow and learn together. IMC this August is the first time we're opening the event to the public by kicking the event off with our first ever Personal Growth Day. This is a 1.5-day event on August 29th through 30th in Orlando, Florida, and it's designed to dig deeper into who you are and how you tick so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you are unable to attend Personal Growth Day in person, we also offer virtual access to the event. If you'd like to participate in a one-of-a-kind experience and stand shoulder to shoulder with growing leaders who will sharpen your skills and equip you to create powerful, positive impact in your life, go to maxwellleadership.com/personal growth day to learn more or get your ticket. We'll see you there.
So the R stands for reality. This is taking a snapshot of where are you now in respect to this goal. What's our starting point? I have a friend that he said it's unfortunate that the GROW makes such a great acronym, and you can call it the GROW model because it really should be RGOW because you should start with reality first and then go for goal. But for the sake of keeping the model together, reality, I think this can be a tough one for leaders to get to.
Yeah, and to the comment you just made that a friend of yours said, I think the number one thing a leader is responsible for is defining reality. Like that's where that's where we have to start. And many people, I think, struggle with this, especially if it's in the performance area where you think, man, I'm killing it. Like I'm performing better than, and then we start comparing ourselves and that is not a model that we need to have as leaders or as people or individual contributors when it comes to performance. When it comes to the career, I think that many of us think we're further along in our career than we really are, and that we have arrived. And I think that there's a struggle there. And so we've got to define reality, not only if we're looking at this for ourselves, but also for those that we are coaching. And we've got to help them understand that. I spend more time here around the reality than I do on the G, the goal, because there's usually a gap. And we've talked about this on a previous episode. I think it's our responsibility as a leader to help our team understand the size of that gap. And it'll be different for each one of your team members, but we've got to help them understand that there is a difference between what's really going on and what the expectations are if that's our goal, and then we define reality for doing that. The other thing is when I go through this and I define reality as a leader in this model, I don't make statements about it. I ask questions. Now, listen, you coach very high-level executives, and then you coach also individual contributors on teams. Right. And I know that as a coach, this is something that you work really hard at doing, which is if I can ask them enough questions to get them to define their own reality and to see the gap, then it's much more powerful than it is me just making a statement to say, this is reality, this is a massive gap. Now you better go figure out how you're going to accomplish your goals. It's just received completely different.
Oh, completely, and then all of a sudden you become the problem. In the
yeah,
they look at you as causing that. No, the idea. Leaders will ask me. They say, "Well, what should I coach?" I said, well, "Coach to the gap." They say,
"Yeah,
what do you mean by
that's
that?"
Good.
I said, no, "Well, this is why the first two steps of this grow model are so important. If I don't know where I'm heading and I don't know where I'm starting, then the gap is not going to be that obvious. So like you said, you spend more time on reality. People struggle for some reason thinking they're better than they are, doing more than they should. I don't think there's a great understanding sometimes of reality. It's a great gift you can give someone to paint a picture of a goal, performance or career or process, whatever we're working on, and then help them understand, well, this is where I see you, give an honest appraisal of where they are, so that it does, all of a sudden, a gap appears. You're here and you want to get there, that's the gap. Now, let's talk about how do we do that. That brings us to the O in the GROW model, and the O stands for options. What could we do in order to close this gap or to bridge this gap, to get across this gap that we've identified now in the first part of our conversation? What are some options?
Yeah. When you get to this in the O of it with options, I love this part because I love options. Matter of fact, I tell my team all the time that I do much better. Again, Perry and I talked in our last episode about even just creativity and how we're different in that. For me, I want to be able to react off of a couple of options and build off of that than if you just kind of bring me one option of what this looks like. So as we think about this, as we go from the G, the R, then to the O, is that I think we can create and present, and through questions, we can come up with some ideas. One of the things I do here when I talk about this is that, I believe our coaching model is built off of something very simple. I call it the 3 A's, which is ask the tough questions, help them develop an action plan moving forward, and then hold them accountable to doing that. And I think that when you do that, you'll be able to stir up and have conversations around these ideas and options. But one of the things I do is that I challenge them to look at other individuals that are doing what they want to do. So if whatever that goal is, and they say, hey, I know that Perry has achieved that goal, and I know that that's something that he has accomplished. I'll say, hey, well, what is it that you see about what Perry's doing? And I ask the question. And then I say, well, do you think if he was doing this, that may help you? Like, is that an option? Right? Oh, it might be. And you ask it in a form of question. But you also then get them to look out. Again, they don't know what they don't know. And so you get them to do a comparative analysis on maybe some other people that are achieving similar goals that they would want to do. It's just one way for you to do that. And then what I love, is that if you begin to have those conversations and you leave them with these options and you're asking these questions, then that just opens the door right into your next coaching conversation with them, of being able to hold them accountable to your last conversation.
And I love that. And the big thing I learned about the O part about options was it needs to be as much as possible their idea. They come up with the options. Again, if you come up with an option and it doesn't work, then you're to blame. So getting them to commit for that leads us to the W, the final step of the GROW model, and that is some say the way forward, or what will you do? Really trying to get them to pick one. You don't want to leave somebody with 4 options. You want to, what are we going to work on? And I think that really sets you up for those follow-ons and accountability. But how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So for me, you got to have clarity around the goal, right? And then you got to have clarity around reality. And then you got to have clarity around what the options are. And then guess what? You got to have clarity around the way forward. Yeah. It's the only way, to your point, where I mentioned the kind of the 3 A's about that accountability partner. you should never have a conversation with somebody through this process and then leave it open-ended, right? You should always say, hey, all right, so listen, so what are your next steps? It's one of the things I love about you and I are part of our team, and we run, what we call our L10 meetings on Monday. It's through an EOS system. It's a format that we use, and we absolutely love it. But one of the things is we get real specific in there, and we say, okay, so if that's our goal, this is where we're at right now, and these are our options, like what's the next step in order to continue our way forward? And then we get real specific, and we're really clear, and we lay that out, and then we come back and then report that the next one. So I would just say, as I kind of wrap up and think about our conversation today, again, another very simple model. Perry and I talk often about the fact that we love, John Maxwell's leadership content, and we love being able to help people. But the only way we're sitting here is because it's simple. Now, it's not easy, and it's not easy to implement, but it's simple. And so today's model, as we think about the gaps that we see with leaders connecting with their people at level 2, and the gaps we see in organizations of not having a leadership bench because leaders don't know how to develop their people, this right here, this simple GROW method allows you to do that.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.